Welcome back to This is Thailand. Most stories we get sent follow a familiar shape. Man goes to Thailand. Man meets woman. Man falls in love. Man loses his money, sometimes his dignity, occasionally his passport. He comes home wiser. We've heard it 100 times, and in 100 different ways it's still true, still worth telling. But every so often we get a story that doesn't quite fit that shape, and those are the ones that stay with you. Brendan Callahan is 63 years old. He's a retired plumber from County Roscommon in the west of Ireland. 40 years with his hands in walls, under floors, sorting out other people's problems. He is not, by his own description, a man who says much. He thinks a long time before he speaks, and when he does speak, he means it. Brendan went to Thailand as a widower. He went, he says, because a mate of his wouldn't shut up about the place, and it was February and raining. And there wasn't much else to argue for staying. What happened there, what he built, and what he chose to do when something started to feel wrong is not the kind of story where the man gets cheated and doesn't see it coming. This is the kind where he sees it coming and decides to find out for certain, where he designs the test himself, gets a clean result, and then has to live with that. Here's his story in his own words. I should say at the start that I'm not a man who usually talks about himself. I'll tell you about a job, a tricky one, a complicated one, the way some old pipes behave differently in cold weather than you'd expect. I'll talk about that all evening. My own life? I find I don't have much to say. Siobhán used to joke about it. She said I processed everything internally, which was her polite way of saying I was impossible to read and it drove her mad. She wasn't wrong, so I'll do my best here. I'll tell it straight, and you can take from it what you like. I was a plumber for 40 years. Started as an apprentice in Galway at 16, worked my way up, eventually went out on my own doing domestic and commercial work around Athlone. It was fine work. Good work, actually. There's something satisfying about it that people don't expect. Finding the problem, understanding the system, fixing the thing. You go home knowing what you did that day. Not everyone has that. I married Siobhán when I was 24. She was 22. We had 2 kids, Siobhán and Awaf, and a semi-detached in Athlone that always needed something doing to it, which I was always meaning to get around to and largely didn't. That's the cobbler's shoes, isn't it? We were happy, not in a dramatic way, in the ordinary way that's actually better, the way you don't appreciate it properly until it's not there. Siobhán was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2017. We did everything you do. The consultants, the treatment, the second opinions. She was sick for 3 years. The last 14 months, she couldn't really manage on her own, so I stopped working and I looked after her. That's all I want to say about that. I'm not going to describe it in any more detail because it doesn't help anything to describe it. She died in March of 2020. We were in lockdown. There was a small funeral because there had to be. The house went quiet in a way I hadn't known a house could go quiet. And I know that sounds like a thing people say, like a poetic thing, but it's not. It was literal. The sounds she made just moving around, a cupboard, the tap, the television in the other room. I hadn't realized I was so used to those sounds until they were gone. And then the whole country went quiet on top of it, which was strange. Surreal isn't quite the word. It was like the world had decided to match. I stayed in the house for 14 months after she died. I want to be honest about that. I kept thinking I'd get used to it. I did not get used to it. I sold it in May of 2021. Cleared the small bit of mortgage that was left, gave Kieran and Awif a portion each, and found myself sitting in a rented flat in Ballinasloe, which is a town 20-odd kilometers from Athlone. I'd never lived there before in my life. I'm not sure why I chose it, except that I needed somewhere that wasn't Athlone, with €158,000 and 2 small pensions coming in. The state pension and a trade pension, combined, something like $2,200 a month. I had more money in my account than I'd ever had in my life. I didn't feel wealthy. I didn't feel anything much. I felt like a man who'd retired from a job he hadn't chosen to retire from, which I suppose is what I was. My friend Desi had been divorced the year before. Different kind of loss, but he understood having nowhere particular to be. He'd been to Thailand. Desi would go anywhere once, he's that sort. And he'd come back going on about it. The weather, the food, the cost of things, how easy it all was, how alive he'd felt there. I ignored him for the better part of a year. When Desi gets enthusiastic about something, the natural response is to wait it out. But then it was February, and it was raining sideways. The particular Roscommon rain that doesn't come down so much as arrive from every direction at once. And I was sitting at the kitchen table in this flat that wasn't really mine, with nothing on for the day. And I opened the laptop and I looked at flights. Just looked. I told myself I was just looking. I was on a plane to Bangkok 3 weeks later. I told myself I needed the heat. I half believed it. I'm not going to romanticize the journey over because there's nothing to romanticize. It's a long flight. Your back hurts. You arrive confused and slightly gray, and the heat hits you the moment you step out of Suvarnabhumi, and it's like walking into a wall of warm, damp air that smells of nothing you can identify yet, but you will, eventually. I took a taxi to a guest house near Khao San Road that I'd booked based on the reviews, and I slept for 11 hours, and then I woke up and tried to be a tourist. That's the honest way to describe it. I tried to be a tourist. I did the things you're supposed to do. I went to Wat Pho and looked at the enormous reclining Buddha, which is extraordinary, genuinely extraordinary. And I looked at it for a long time, and then I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do next. I took a boat along the Chao Phraya. I walked through the markets, the long covered ones with the clothes and the trinkets and the noise. I ate pad Thai from a street cart beside the river, and it was better than anything I'd had from a Thai restaurant at home, which I should have expected and somehow didn't. I wasn't miserable exactly, but I was aware that I was moving through things rather than being in them. A tourist, which I was, which sat badly with me. I'd spent 40 years being useful, and this was me being definitively, conspicuously useless. An elderly Irish man walking slowly around Bangkok with no particular purpose. There are thousands of us, I discovered. You see us in the 7-Elevens at odd hours, buying Chang beer and toasted sandwiches, looking at our phones. At the guest house a few days in, I got talking to a fella at breakfast. I didn't catch where he was from. Somewhere European, Dutch maybe, or German. He'd been traveling for months and had the easy manner of a man who'd stopped worrying about having a plan. He said if I hadn't been to Chiang Mai, I should go. Quieter, he said, more livable. Less of a performance. I took the overnight bus north 3 days later. Chiang Mai was different from the moment I arrived. Cooler, for one thing. You can actually breathe. The old city is surrounded by a moat and ancient walls, and the streets inside are narrow and calm in a way that Bangkok never quite manages. I found a small guest house near the West Gate, paid 400 baht a night, and I started walking. Just walking. The temples, the morning markets, the coffee shops on Niman Road, where young Thai people sat with laptops, and the air smelled of good coffee and frangipani from the trees outside. I started, not dreading mornings. That's the most I'll say about it. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was more like the noise had gone down a bit. I'd been in Chiang Mai 4 or 5 days when I walked past a small tour company near the night bazaar. I'm not sure what caught my attention. The sign was nothing special. I went in to ask about a day trip to Doi Inthanon, the national park up in the hills. The girl at the desk, woman, I should say, she was 38, though I didn't know that yet. The woman at the desk looked up and said, in perfectly clear English, that it was a good choice, and asked whether I preferred to go in a small group or arrange it privately. Her name was Noi. She had a very composed, slightly formal manner, like a person who's learned to be professional in a language that isn't hers and takes some care about it. She didn't try to sell me anything else. She answered my questions, printed out the information, told me what to bring. I booked the trip. I went back the next day to ask about pickup times. I'd looked them up on my phone the night before. I knew the answer before I walked in. I went back because I wanted to talk to her again. That was the whole of it. I'm 63 years old, and I went back to a tour office to ask a question I already knew the answer to because I wanted another few minutes of conversation with a woman who'd looked at me like I was a normal person and answered my questions without fuss. That's where it started. That's the whole of it. The day trip to Doi Inthanon was fine. Good, actually. A minivan at 7 in the morning, 6 other tourists, a guide named Tan who spoke fast and knew everything about the mountain. We went up through cloud forest, which I hadn't expected. I'd imagined Thailand as flat and hot, and this was neither. It was cool and green and the air smelled of pine, which felt wrong and right at the same time. There are twin pagodas near the summit built for the king and queen, white and perfect against the gray sky. I stood there for a while looking at them, and Tan told me about the royal family with a reverence that reminded me of how people talked about the church when I was young in Roscommon. Not the same thing, but the same quality of it. I went back to the tour office that afternoon to tell Noi the trip had been good. She seemed pleased. She asked what I'd thought of the pagodas. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. I bought a bottle of water from the 7-Eleven across the road and stood outside it drinking it, and I thought, I should probably extend my stay. I extended my stay by 4 days. Then another week. She'd join me for dinner occasionally in the evenings. Not every evening. She had her daughter, she had things to do, she had a life that didn't revolve around me, and I found that, I don't know, reassuring. We'd eat at this little place on the road beside the moat that did khao soi, a northern noodle dish, yellow curry broth with egg noodles, crispy noodles on top, lime on the side. I'd never had it before Chiang Mai. I ate it 4 times that first trip. Noi would sometimes pay for herself and sometimes let me pay, and she never made an event of either. She asked about Ireland. She'd never met an Irish person before, she said. She thought we were all like the films. I asked which films. She said she wasn't entirely sure. She told me about her daughter, 8 years old in primary school, quiet like her mother. Her ex-husband had left when the girl was 2, gone to work in Bangkok and gradually stopped coming back and then stopped calling. She mentioned this without much heat in it. Just a fact, the way I'd say a pipe had corroded. This happened. This is the situation now. I left after 3 weeks. Had to. My visa was running out and I hadn't sorted a longer one. I took a song Theo to the airport in the early morning, and I remember thinking on the way that I'd left Ballinasloe without feeling anything, and I was leaving Chiang Mai feeling something I couldn't quite name. Not loss, exactly. More like interruption. I got back to the flat, and it was raining. Of course it was raining. The flat was exactly as I'd left it. Same chairs, same kitchen, same view of a car park. And it felt smaller than I remembered, though I knew it was the same size. I'd just gotten used to a different amount of space. Noi and I talked online. That's the messaging app they use in Thailand. Not WhatsApp, not text, Line. She'd message in the evenings, her time, which was my afternoon, asking how Ireland was, sending photographs occasionally, the daughter doing something at school, a view from a temple she'd visited. I'd respond, I'm not a man who writes much, but I managed. I want to be clear about something, because I know what you're probably thinking at this point. I know the shape of these stories. I'd watched a few of them on YouTube before I went, not this channel, other ones, and the shape is usually the same. Man meets woman. Woman is calculating from the start. Every warm moment is performance. I had that in mind. I kept that in mind. But Noi didn't ask me for anything in those 3 weeks. Not a single thing. Didn't ask me to send money. Didn't have a sick relative in the first conversation, or the second, or the third. She didn't push. She didn't try to lock me down. When I left, she said she'd enjoyed the company and hoped I'd come back sometime. That was it. I went back 2 months later. That's all the evidence you need about the state I was in. 2 months. The second visit was different. Less tourists, more. I don't know what to call it. We spent proper time together. Day trips, yes, but also just ordinary evenings. I met her daughter briefly at the end of the first week. The girl was shy. She stood behind her mother's arm and looked at me from around it, and then very formally said hello in English, which she'd clearly been coached on and was delivering with great concentration. I said hello back with equal seriousness. Noi laughed, the first time I'd heard her actually laugh. The daughter called me uncle. It's what Thai children call adult men they don't have a category for, I learned later. It's not significant, it's just what you say. But I didn't know that yet, and it did something to me. I'm not going to dress it up. I hadn't been called anything in particular by a child since my own were small, and I'd forgotten how much I'd liked it. Noi paid for things when she could. Not always. I was clearly the one with money. But she paid for dinner one evening and for two tuk-tuks, and she bought me a small ceramic elephant from a market stall and was embarrassed about giving it to me, which made it worse, or better, depending on how you look at it. I noticed. I filed it away under. This is a person who has some pride. I know how this sounds. I know I'm telling you about a woman who turned out to have her eye on my pension, and I'm saying nice things about her. But that's the truth of it. Both things were true simultaneously. I've thought about it a lot since, and I still think both things were true simultaneously. She was a real person with a real life who also needed money. Those aren't contradictory. Before I left at the end of the second visit, she mentioned very carefully that she'd been thinking about looking for a different job. The tour company had been cutting hours since the pandemic. She wasn't complaining, just mentioning. I said that sounded sensible. She said she wasn't sure what else she was qualified for. I said I was sure she'd work it out. 2 months after I got home, she messaged to say she was still at the tour company, still on reduced hours. I asked if she was managing. She said yes, fine, thank you. I booked a third visit, 4 months after the first one. This time I told myself I'd look into a longer-term visa situation because standing in an airport every 3 weeks is a young man's game, and I'm not a young man. It was on that third visit that she raised very carefully, almost apologetically, the question of whether I might consider staying longer. Not permanently. Just her lease was ending, and Chiang Mai was expensive, and she was wondering about her options. She wasn't asking me for anything directly. She just said it the way you might say something out loud that you've been thinking privately. Not expecting an answer. I took an apartment near the Nimmenhemen Road area. Service place, clean, came with everything. 27,000 baht a month. About €720. Nothing. Cheaper than renting in Galway, far cheaper than Dublin. I signed a 3-month lease and told myself I was trying it out. She moved in 6 weeks after I took the apartment. Her idea, not mine. I want to be precise about that because I've turned it over a lot since. She suggested it. She said it made practical sense. She was there most evenings anyway. Her daughter liked the place. It would help with her own rent situation. All true, I said if she wanted to. She said she thought it made sense. I said, all right then. I didn't push. I was careful not to push. I told myself that the fact she'd suggested it meant something. Maybe it did. I'm still not sure. A-Wave called that week. My daughter. She rang from Dublin and I was standing on the small balcony of the apartment and you could hear the motorbikes and a temple bell from somewhere. And she said, Dad, is that? Where are you? I said, Chiang Mai. She said, again? I said I might stay a bit longer. There was a pause, the particular pause that tells you someone has something to say and is deciding not to say it. Right, Dad, she said. That was it. Just right, Dad. I should have asked what she meant. I knew what she meant. I chose not to ask. I want to talk about what I was thinking at this point because I think it matters. I'd heard the warnings. Every man who goes to Thailand hears the warnings. You hear them before you go. You hear them from fellas in guest houses. You hear them from the internet if you go anywhere near the internet and mention Thailand. The warnings are always the same. Bar girls, Pattaya, walking street, women who clock a farang the moment he walks in and start calculating. I understood all of that. I'm not an idiot. But the warnings were about a specific thing, a specific arrangement. And this wasn't that. Noi wasn't a bar girl. She'd never worked in that world at all, as far as I could tell, and believe me, I'd thought about it. She had a job with a desk and a name badge and opening hours. She had a daughter in school. She had a life with structure to it. The warnings didn't seem to apply. I think about that reasoning now and I understand it. And I also understand why it was exactly the kind of reasoning that left me exposed. The warnings are about the obvious version. The obvious version is easy to spot and easy to avoid. It's the non-obvious version that gets you, because the non-obvious version looks like a real person living a real life, because that's what it is. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The money started moving about 2 months after Noi moved into the apartment. Not large amounts at first, not dramatically. The first thing was the school fees. Noi mentioned it the way she mentioned most things. Not as a request, just as information. Her daughter had tested into a private school the previous year on merit. The girl was bright, Noi said this matter-of-factly. No boasting in it. The school fees were 45,000 baht a term, roughly 1,200 euro. She'd been covering them from her own salary, but the tour company had cut hours again, this time significantly, and she was short. She wasn't asking me, she said. She was just telling me the situation. I told her I'd cover it. Of course I did. What was the alternative? Let the girl lose her school place because her mother's employer had cut hours? The child had earned that place, 1,200 euro. I'd spent more than that on solicitors sorting Siobhán's estate without a second thought. I transferred the money to Noi's account that evening. That was the first time I transferred money. I remember thinking, this is the moment the stories always start. And then I thought, but those stories are about a different situation. And then I transferred the money. The second thing came about 3 months later and was more complicated. Noi's mother owned land in Chiang Rai province, up in the hills north of the city, where her family had farmed for years. There was a boundary dispute with the neighboring property. Not unusual in rural Thailand, I gathered, where old title deeds can be vague about exact lines. The neighbor was pushing the matter legally, and they needed a solicitor to defend the title. The amount was 60,000 baht, about 1,600 euro. Now, I want to explain why I paid this one, because I've had to explain it to myself several times since. I saw the documents, that's the thing. There were actual papers, a copy of the title deed, a letter from the neighbor's solicitor, a quote from a Chiang Rai lawyer for the defense work. I'm a tradesman. I've dealt with legal documents, planning permissions, insurance disputes. I looked at those papers and they looked real because they were real. The dispute was real. The land was real. The mother needed help. I'd sorted solicitors for more straightforward things than that back home. 1,600 euro. I paid it. The third thing was the motorbike accident, and this one was harder to say no to for reasons that had nothing to do with money. Noi's younger brother, 26, worked in Chiang Rai near where the family lived, came off his motorbike on a rural road and hit another vehicle. His fault, or partly his fault, the details were unclear. He was in hospital for 2 weeks with a broken collarbone and a fractured wrist. There were hospital bills, there were lost wages because he did casual labor and had no sick pay, and there was a settlement required with the family of the other driver, which is how these things are handled out in the provinces. Not always through insurance, often just between families directly. The total across 6 weeks was 120,000 baht, just over 3,200 euro. I need to tell you about the mother before you judge that payment, because the mother is important. I went up to Chiang Rai with Noi for the Thai New Year. Songkran, when everything shuts and everyone goes home to family. We took the bus north, 3 hours or so, and then a Song Thio out along a rural road to the village. Rice paddies on both sides, the hills green and steep behind them. Roosters going mad somewhere. The house was modest, wooden, raised on stilts in the way of older rural Thai houses, a vegetable patch to one side, a spirit house at the gate with fresh flowers in it. Noi's mother was a small woman, 60 or so, hard to tell. She'd been farming most of her life, and you could see it in her hands, the knuckles enlarged, the skin dry and dark. When she saw me, she bowed, both hands pressed together, a proper Y. And then she took my hands in hers and pressed them together and bowed over them. And I stood there in this dusty yard in Chiang Rai province, feeling like something I couldn't name. Siobhán's mother had hands like that. That's the honest truth of it. Small and rough and very certain. I hadn't thought about Siobhán's mother in years, and standing there I thought about her quite clearly. I know telling it now that this is exactly the kind of thing that does its work on a person. I know that. I could see it doing its work on me, and I let it, because the alternative was to stand in a dead woman's mother's yard in rural Thailand and refuse to be moved, which I couldn't manage. We sat at a low table inside and ate sticky rice and larb, a minced pork salad with lime and fish sauce and toasted rice, and something I couldn't identify that tasted of lemongrass and chilies. Noi's uncle sat across from me and said things in Northern Thai dialect that Noi translated in approximate fashion. He wanted to know about Ireland. He'd heard it was cold. I said yes, often. He laughed as if this was extraordinary. I understood nothing that was said for most of that afternoon. I sat there in the heat with a bottle of Leo beer sweating in my hand, and the sound of the family around me and a small child who wasn't Noy's daughter but a cousin or a niece, asleep on a mat in the corner. And I have to be honest about this, I felt somewhere I was supposed to be. I hadn't felt that since Athlone. I hadn't felt it in the flat in Ballinasloe. Not once. I felt it there, in a house I'd never been in before, with people I couldn't talk to. So when the brothers' situation came up and the amount was explained, I paid it, €3,200. I'd have paid more. I want to be clear. I'm not saying these payments were smart. I'm saying I understood why I made each one at the time, and I mostly still do. A child's school fees, a widow's legal dispute, a young man's hospital bills. None of it was outrageous. None of it was, and this is the word I kept using to myself at the time, none of it was unreasonable. 4 payments across 8 months. Total, approximately 225,000 baht, about €6,000. That's the first phase. It got more complicated after that. But before I get to the complicated part, one want to say something, because people hear these stories and they assume the whole thing was false. Every dinner, every conversation, every evening on the balcony watching the street below. All performance, all calculation, start to finish. I don't believe that. I believed it for a while after everything happened, because it's the easier belief. It's cleaner, but I don't think it's accurate. She liked me. I think she genuinely liked me. I think she was also in a difficult financial situation and had a family depending on her and saw someone who could help. And those two things existed in her at the same time, and she didn't experience them as contradictory. I'm not sure they were contradictory. I'm not sure where I draw the line, even now, between loving someone and needing what they have. I've been trying to work that out since I got home. I haven't managed it yet. About a year into living in Chiang Mai, Noi raised the question of marriage. She did it the way she did most things, practically, carefully, with reasons attached. We were eating dinner on the balcony, pad krapao from the place around the corner, a chong each, the usual noise of the soi below us. She said she'd been thinking about my visa situation and wondered if I'd looked into it properly. I had looked into it, actually. The retirement visa, non-OA they call it, requires you to be over 50, which I cleared easily, and to have either 800,000 baht sitting in a Thai bank account, which works out to about €21,000, or a monthly income of 65,000 baht, which is roughly €1,700. My 2 pensions combined came close to that, but not quite. And the income route requires documentation. The Irish Pension Authority takes its time producing. The alternative is to renew on the money in bank method, which means maintaining that balance and making a trip to the immigration office in Chiang Mai each year with a stack of paperwork. Not impossible. Not ideal either. Marriage, Noi explained, simplified things considerably. A marriage visa, non-O based on marriage, requires only 400,000 baht in the bank, about €10,500, and the income threshold is lower. She'd spoken to someone at her cousin's husband's office who dealt with these matters. She wasn't wrong about any of it. I'd already half looked at the marriage route myself, because a man who spent 40 years doing jobs properly tends to look at the paperwork before he makes a decision. I want to be honest about what I was thinking at the time. I wasn't thinking, right, she's maneuvered me into this. I was thinking, this makes practical sense. And also, I am 63 years old and I have been happy here in a way I did not expect to be happy anywhere again. And there is a woman across from me who has, by any measure I can apply, been decent to me. That was what I was thinking. We married at the district office, the Amphoe, about 3 weeks after that dinner. I want to be careful not to make it sound like something it wasn't. It was an appointment. We went in with our documents a translator Noi had arranged, and 2 witnesses who were friends of hers. There was a registrar, some forms, some stamps. The whole thing took less than an hour. There was no sinsad discussion, no bride price. Noi raised this herself beforehand. She said she knew I was a widower, and it felt wrong to ask and that it wasn't important to her. I thought that showed character. I still think it showed something, though I'm less certain now exactly what. The meal afterward was at a restaurant her family uses for occasions. A big Thai place off the superhighway road, the kind with round tables and a lazy Susan in the middle, and the sort of food that arrives in quantities designed for 8 people, even when there are only 4 of you. Her mother had come down from Chiang Rai. Her uncle was there, the one who'd asked about Irish weather at Songkran and laughed about the cold. He gave a speech. I have no idea what he said. Everyone laughed at a particular point, so I laughed too. Her mother pressed my hands again when we were leaving and said something to Noi that Noi translated as, "She hopes you will be comfortable here." That's all. She hopes you will be comfortable here. I told my children separately. Siren first on a phone call. He said congratulations and asked if I was well, and then we talked about his work for a bit, and that was that. Siren has always been easy that way. He takes information in, files it, moves on. AOF asked to video call. She rang the next evening, 7 o'clock her time, and I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, and she was very careful. That's the only word for it. She asked how Noi was. She asked how long we'd known each other. She asked, and I could see her choosing the words, whether I'd spoken to a solicitor about the implications, about assets and things. I said I had savings in an Irish account in 2 Irish pensions, and there wasn't much here for anyone to get at. She nodded slowly in the way that meant she had more to say and was deciding against it. She said, "Are you happy, Dad?" I said I was. She said that was good then. She smiled. It was a careful smile, but it was a smile. I think about that call. She was 29 years old and she was managing her father the way you manage someone who has made a decision that worries you but isn't yours to make. She did it well. I didn't make it easy for her. By the time of the wedding, the total I'd transferred to Noi's account across all the stages, school fees, the land dispute, the brother's accident, plus a few smaller things I haven't mentioned, groceries and a dental bill for the daughter, and a contribution to a merit-making ceremony at the temple her mother attended, came to approximately 680,000 baht, just under 18,000 euro. Not ruinous. That's the honest assessment. It's a significant sum to have moved out of your savings without any formal arrangement, but it's not the catastrophic figure you sometimes hear in these stories. My savings were largely intact. Both pensions were coming in. I was living cheaply enough that the day-to-day costs were well within my income. And I was aware, in the background way, that you're aware of a sound you can't quite locate, that the money had never really stopped moving, that each thing had been reasonable and the reasonable things had added up. A plumber knows about accumulation. You can have 20 small leaks in a system that don't look like much individually, and then one day the ceiling comes down. I knew that. I kept telling myself the system was sound. There was one other thing I was aware of. 2 things, actually, around month 15 or 16. The first was Noi's phone. She'd always kept it in her hand or in her bag. Now it was face down on surfaces more often. It's the kind of thing you notice without quite deciding to notice it. Your eye registers it and files it somewhere, and later you remember you filed it. The second was the land dispute, the legal matter with the mother's title deed in Chiang Rai, which I'd paid 60,000 baht toward 8 months prior, was still, according to Noi when I occasionally asked about it, nearly resolved. 7 months of nearly resolved. I'm from a country where legal matters move slowly. I know the difference between slow and stalled. I thought about that sometimes. Then I'd think about something else. I knew something wasn't right the way you know a pipe fitting isn't quite seated. You can't see it. The system seems to be working. But there's a small wrongness in it, and your hands know before your brain does. I kept tightening anyway. Desi rang in February to say he was thinking of coming to visit. Could he? I said of course he could. I was genuinely glad. I hadn't spent proper time with anyone from home in 8 months. I told Noi that evening. She said she was looking forward to meeting him, and she meant it, I think. That part one believed was real. Desi arrived on a Tuesday in March with a carry-on bag and the air of a man who'd been looking forward to something for months, which he had. He came off the flight from Bangkok. He'd spent 2 days there first. Desi always has to have a look at things. And I met him at the arrivals gate, and he looked at me and said, "You've lost weight and you've got some color." Then he said, "All right, where are we eating?" That's Desi, no fuss. We spent 4 days together. I showed him the old city, Wat Chetty Luang, with its ancient crumbling tower. The Saturday night walking market on Wulai Road, where the silversmiths sell their work and the air smells of incense and grilled corn, and there's a constant soft noise of people browsing in the warm dark. We ate cow soy together at my usual place by the moat, and he pronounced it the best thing he'd had in his life, which is what Desi says about most food he encounters for the first time. We drank Leo on the balcony and talked about home, mutual friends, his daughter's new job, what was happening in Athlone, the general news of a life he was still living and I'd stepped sideways out of. Noi joined us for dinner on the second evening, a decent restaurant on Niman Road, the kind of place that does northern Thai food properly, good larb, excellent pork ribs glazed with something I could never identify precisely, but ate every time I could. She was at her best that evening. Composed, warm when warmth was called for, asked Desi about his journey and what he thought of Chiang Mai, and listened to the answers with what seemed like genuine interest. Desi liked her. He told me so on the walk back. The taxi back from dinner was just the two of us. Noi had gone home to the daughter, who'd been with a school friend, and Desi was quiet for a bit in the way that meant he was deciding whether to say something. He said, "Does she work?" I said she'd left the tour company a few months back, still looking for the right thing. He said, "Who pays for the apartment?" I said I did. It was in my name on the lease. He said, "The whole thing?" I said yes, the whole thing, and I said it in a tone that was intended to close the conversation. And Desi, to his credit, heard the tone and respected it. He said fair enough and looked out the window for the rest of the ride. He didn't ask about the money. He didn't ask anything else. I told him to leave it, and he left it. That was the right thing to do. But he'd ask the questions, and questions don't disappear just because you've told someone to leave it. They go somewhere else. They sit down quietly in a part of your mind that doesn't get a lot of traffic and wait. The 3 weeks after Desi left were the longest 3 weeks I'd spent since arriving in Thailand. It wasn't any single thing. I want to be clear about that. It was several small things, none of which would have amounted to much on its own. The phone face down on the kitchen counter when I came in, which happened more than it used to. A Sunday afternoon in late March, when Noi said she was going to visit her mother and came back 4 hours later without the usual bag of mangosteens or pad thai from the village market. She always brought something back from visits. It was just what she did, and this time she didn't. And when I mentioned it, she said the shops had been closed. I didn't push. A question I asked twice about the land dispute resolution in Chiang Rai, which she answered each time with nearly resolved and changed the subject, with a smoothness that suggested she'd changed it before. I am, by nature and profession, a man who diagnoses systems. When something isn't working, you observe it carefully before you touch it. You don't rattle the pipes to see what happens. You listen, you think, you form a hypothesis, then you test it. I thought about it for 3 weeks. I said nothing to anyone. I worked out the details the way I'd work out the approach to a complicated job. What information I needed, what the result would tell me, what I'd do with the result once I had it. Then one evening, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, while Noi was washing up and the daughter was doing something in the other room with a tablet, I told her about Siren. I said his name first to make it feel real. I said Kiran had rung me that morning. I'd been keeping this to myself because I didn't want to worry her, but I thought she should know. He'd gotten into trouble with a business loan. A fella he'd gone in with had pulled out and left him holding the debt. The situation was serious. There was a chance, not certain, but a real chance, that I'd need to send a significant portion of my savings back to Ireland to help him. Possibly most of it. I was sorry. I wanted her to know because it might affect our plans and it wouldn't be fair to keep it from her. I watched her face while I said it. I have watched a lot of faces in 40 years of work. You learn to read them the way you learn to read a pressure gauge, not by what they show you, but by how quickly they move and what they move away from. A customer deciding whether to dispute the invoice looks a particular way. A foreman deciding whether a job is good enough to pass looks another way. Noi's face moved in the way of someone receiving information that changes a calculation they've been running. It was brief. Less than a second. Then she assembled the correct response and delivered it in the correct order. Of course, she said, family comes first. It doesn't matter about the money. We'll manage whatever happens. She said it warmly. She meant some of it. But something had left the room and we both felt it, and neither of us said so. which is its own kind of answer. I said thank you. We watched television for an hour. We went to bed. In the morning, everything was ordinary. 8 days later, I was counting. I'm ashamed to say I was counting. She told me she thought she needed some time with her mother. The mother had been a bit unwell. Nothing serious, but she wanted to check on her. A week, maybe 2. The daughter would stay with her school friend's family, who'd offered before and were happy to have her. She packed a bag. A careful bag, not a panicked one. The right amount of things for a week or 2 away. She kissed me and said she'd call. She said it the way you say something true. She did call, 3 times the first week. Warm, brief, slightly distracted. The calls she made sounded like calls made from habit rather than want, though it's possible I was reading that in. Second week they came less frequently. I didn't push. I texted occasionally. She replied, everything was fine. Her mother was a little better. She'd be back soon. I know how to wait. I learned it properly in those 14 months with Siobhán. The specific discipline of sitting with something you cannot make move faster, of filling the hours with ordinary things, and not letting the waiting swallow you. I cooked. I walked. I went to the 7-Eleven at the end of the road and bought things I didn't need because it was something to do at 9 in the evening. I sat on the balcony and listened to the sea below, the motorbikes, a dog somewhere, the faint pulse of music from a bar 2 streets over. On the 15th day, I sent a line message. I said, good news about Kieran. He'd managed to sort it with the bank. The situation was resolved. My savings were intact. She was back 48 hours later. She had a reason ready. Her mother had taken a turn and then recovered, and she hadn't wanted to alarm me. I had enough to worry about with Kieran, and she'd wanted to stay until she was certain the recovery was stable. She said all of this standing in the hallway with her bag still in her hand, looking at me with an expression that was trying to be natural and was not quite managing it. I let her finish. I gave her the time she needed to say all of it. Then I said quietly that I thought we both knew what had happened, and I thought we should be honest about it. She cried. The crying was real. I'm certain of that. Whatever else was performance, the crying wasn't. She sat down on the couch and she cried in a way that looked like genuine grief. And I believe it was genuine grief, because I think she understood what the conversation was going to end with, and she was grieving it before it arrived. We talked for a while. She didn't confess anything explicitly. She didn't need to. The test had given me its result. A plumber who finds a leak doesn't need the pipe to admit it's leaking. I asked her to leave. She nodded. She didn't argue, didn't try to negotiate, didn't ask me to reconsider. She went and packed properly. It took about 40 minutes, and she came back out with 2 bags and the daughter's things from the room, and she said, I'm sorry, Brendan. She said my name, which she didn't often do. I said I know. And she left, and the apartment went quiet in a way I hadn't felt since Athlone, except this time I'd built the quiet myself. And that was the worst part of it. One expected to book a flight home that week. I didn't. I'm not entirely sure why. I sat in the apartment the morning after she left, her side of the wardrobe open, a few things she'd not bothered with still on the hangers, the daughter's drawings still stuck to the wall beside the window with bits of tape. And I thought I should start looking at flights. And then I made a cup of tea and sat on the balcony and watched the street below and didn't look at flights. I stayed 2 months. The first week was the strangest. Not terrible exactly. Strange. I found myself noticing the apartment differently. The way the morning light came in, which I'd never paid much attention to before. The sounds of the building waking up, a neighbor's television, someone frying something at 6 in the morning that smelled of garlic and fish sauce. I ate very simply, rice and whatever I could point at from the place around the corner. I walked in the evenings along the moat road, where the old wall meets the water and the trees hang over and it's quiet enough to hear yourself, more or less. I wasn't miserable. That's the honest answer, and I know it probably sounds wrong. I think I'd been braced for something worse, and the something worse didn't arrive. What arrived instead was a peculiar stillness, like a system that's been running under pressure for a long time finally depressurizing. I went back to the temples, not as a tourist this time, or not only as a tourist. I'd walked past Wat Suan Dock dozens of times and gone in twice. I went in 4 times that first week alone. There are monks who come out in the mornings to collect alms, walking in a line in their orange robes before the city properly wakes. And I'd always been up early enough to see them and never stopped to watch properly. I stopped and watched properly. I don't know what I was looking for in doing that. Probably nothing specific. It was just a thing to do that felt more meaningful than not doing it. I rang a wife after about 10 days. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said she was sorry, Dad, genuinely. I said I was all right. She said, "Are you?" I said, "Yes, I think so." She said she'd been worried about me for a while. I said, "I know you had." I said I was sorry I'd been difficult to reach. She said I hadn't been difficult to reach. I'd just been far away, which was a kind way of putting it and also accurate. I want to be straight with you about the money because that's what people want to know, and I think they deserve a plain answer. The transfers to Noy's account across the 2.5 years, 680,000 baht, just under 18,000 euro. That's the direct figure. On top of that, my living costs for those 2.5 years, the apartment at 27,000 baht a month, food, transport, the visa fees, the wedding meal, 1 or 2 flights back to Ireland when I needed to deal with things, comes to approximately another 17,000 euro. Total, 35,000 euro, give or take. That's what Thailand cost me. I still have just over 100,000 euro in savings. Both pensions are still coming in, just over 2,200 a month combined. I'm not in difficulty. I'm renting a flat in Galway now, which is more expensive than Chiang Mai and considerably wetter, but it's manageable. I know how that sounds when you compare it to some of the stories on this channel. Men who've lost their entire retirement, men who've built houses on land they can't own and watched it all get taken. I got off lightly. I'm aware of that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I think about Noy still. Not in the way that keeps you awake. More in the way you think about something you haven't properly understood yet and know you probably won't. I think about her daughter, the girl who called me uncle and delivered hello in English with great seriousness. I wonder how she's getting on at the private school. Probably she still is. Noy would find a way to keep her there. I don't think Noy was a bad person. I want to say that clearly. I've listened to enough of these stories to know that's not always the conclusion people come to, and I understand why. If you've lost everything, you're going to see it differently. But I think she was a woman in a difficult situation with a child and a family, depending on her, and I was a man with money in no particular direction, and we were useful to each other for a period, and the usefulness ran in more directions than just the financial one. That's the most honest way I can put it. The mistake I made wasn't going to Thailand, and it wasn't meeting her. The mistake was going there the way I went, with a gap inside me the shape of Siobhán, and expecting something I found in Chiang Mai to fill it. That's not fair. It's not fair to the place, and it's not fair to the person, and it's not fair to yourself. When you're that lonely, when you've lost the one person who knew you completely, you're not in a state to be making permanent decisions. You're not. You're in a state to be making the next small decision. Get out of the house, get some air, eat something decent. That's the size of decision you're equipped for. I went to Thailand, and I made large decisions, and I made them from a place of need I hadn't fully reckoned with, and the result was what you'd expect. Thailand was grand. I'd go back. I probably will go back, eventually, for a holiday. See Chiang Mai again without all the weight of it. Eat the khao soy. Walk the moat road in the evening. But I went there looking for Siobhán in a different shape. And that's not fair on anyone. Not on her, not on Noy, not on myself. The test worked perfectly, that was the worst part of it. And that's where we'll leave Brendan Callahan, 63 years old, a retired plumber from County Roscommon, a man who sat in a flat with more money than he'd ever had and went looking for something he couldn't name, found something close enough to it to hold on to for a while, and then, when he needed to know the truth, found it in the most direct way available to him. He designed the test, he ran it, he got his answer. We've heard a lot of stories on This Is Thailand. Stories of men who were deceived from the beginning, men who were shown red flags they chose not to see, men who lost everything and came home with nothing but the lesson. Brendan's story's a little different. He wasn't oblivious. He wasn't reckless. He's one of the most careful men we've featured on this channel in his way. And he still ended up €35,000 lighter and alone in an apartment in Chiang Mai with an open wardrobe. The money wasn't the real loss. You've probably already worked that out. If you're watching this and you're thinking about going to Thailand, or anywhere really, to start over after a loss, we're not here to tell you not to go. Go. The heat is real. The food is real. The kindness of strangers in temples at 6 in the morning is real. But know what you're carrying when you get on the plane. Know what you're grieving and know what you're actually looking for. The two things may not be the same, and the distance between them is where the expensive lessons tend to happen. Thanks for watching. This is Thailand. If Brendan's story meant something to you, leave a comment below. He'll see them, and I think he'd appreciate knowing it landed. Subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you on the next one. I noticed the document contains Chapter 6, but labels it as the content for Chapter 7. Looking at the full story as written across all 6 previous chapters, it appears Chapters 6 and 7 have been combined into one chapter in the previous response. The Reckoning, Brendan's 2 months staying on, the financial accounting, and the host outro were all written together. The complete story is actually already finished across what was presented as Chapters 1 through 6, with that final chapter doing the work of both the unraveling's conclusion and the full reckoning. The script as written runs to a natural, complete end. If you'd like, I can do any of the following. Compile the full script into a single clean document with all 7 chapters assembled in order, which would make it easy to hand to a narrator or editor. Write a standalone alternate Chapter 7 that separates the reckoning more cleanly from the test chapter, giving Brendan's final reflections and the host outro their own dedicated space with more room to breathe, closer to the original outline's intention of keeping those 2 acts distinct. Review and tighten any specific chapter that feels too long or needs adjusting before the final assembly. Just let me know which direction you'd like to go, and I'll get straight to it.